Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Angela and thrilled to have you here today. Make sure if you love the podcast that you subscribe. And I have a very special treat for you today. I have with me Becky McCoy. And Becky is an engaging writer and speaker on spiritual formation who helps women who are disillusioned with their faith bravely face difficult life circumstances and tenderness. As a young widow who has processed her own grief, learned to live with anxiety and depression, and adjusted her perspective on what it means to suffer, Becky earned a master's in Christian theology and spiritual formation and uses these experiences and tools to guide women in discovering gentle, trauma-informed ways of being and believing. Becky is currently in training to be a spiritual director and writing a book on contemplative spiritual practices for grief, mental illness, and burnout. Wow, you've got lots going on.
Yeah, when you read it out loud, it does sound like a lot more than it feels.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time to be here today and for sharing your story. I think this is going to be great.
Yeah, I'm really excited to chat.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about your journey into this um, formation of your practice. Like it's just
Sure.
so fascinating. Let us know how it goes. Yeah.
Well, my professional life I started out as a high school secondary physics teacher. So nothing related to what I'm doing now. And I loved it, but it was this particular school I was working at was just not a healthy place for me to be. Um, And now looking back, now I know that I have ADHD, and no wonder working in a public school was not a great fit because every day I would forget to take attendance and like all of those little things,
Mm.
just my brain just could not do it. Um, so that's kind of where I started. And then I got pregnant, and that was kind of a convenient excuse to leave teaching. And my husband and I were so excited. He had had cancer while we were engaged, and the treatment that he had um, affects fertility. And both of our parents had had fertility issues. And so we expected to possibly not be able to have kids at all. And we just kind of knew that going in and had processed that. And so getting pregnant was just this like super exciting. We didn't think it was going to happen. And over the course of my pregnancy, we discovered that my dad had an incurable form of cancer that isn't very well researched. And um, there's just kind of, you can barely even treat it to make you comfortable.
Mm.
So
Wow.
that was really devastating. And my dad ended up dying 8 hours after my son was born. And my husband was in the U.S. Air Force, and we were stationed out in the western part of the U.S. And we both grew up on the eastern part of the country. And so I lost my dad just after giving birth 3,000 miles away.
Mm.
Um, I couldn't tell you what that is in kilometers,
Yeah.
but
Wow.
a very far distance.
Yeah.
And so that something kind of happened and shifted there. I had experienced grief my whole life. My mom's parents both died when I was very young, when she was in her 20s and her early 30s. And we had lost a lot of I had lost a professor just after college that I'd spent a lot of time with. One of my coworkers when I was teaching passed away. Like I'd experienced grief and loss my entire life. This was a very familiar, I kind of always joked that funerals were a hobby of mine because I was just
Mm.
at them all the time, unfortunately. But something was different when my dad died. And I really struggled and I was really angry. Um, and it was really hard to handle the joy and excitement of having the first grandkid. On
Mhm.
my side, it was number seven, I think. Yeah, seven on my husband's side. But we were all just so excited, and then also this just devastation and sorrow of my dad being gone and not being there with him for his last couple months of life. Um, and so I started writing. Back then blogs were just starting to really gain in popularity. And so I had been blogging for a little while, and now I just kind of started talking more about what this grief felt like, and the struggles that I was having and the questions that I had, and all of this. And it was really resonating with people because at that time we still weren't talking openly about grief at all, or really even mental health.
Right.
Um, so that I just kind of went with that and just kept writing and kept just exploring. And fast forward 2 years, I got pregnant again, which was again like so surprising and exciting, and but came with it this trauma of having lost my dad dying while I was giving birth. Um, and just saying, I know in my head, my being pregnant does not cause someone to die.
Right.
But we've done this once and that's how it happened. So and so just talking through that fear and that all of that. And a couple months into my pregnancy, my husband was diagnosed with a different kind of incurable cancer.
Mm.
And so kind of everyone's worst nightmare had come true again. And we discovered that like the most optimistic um, story would be that maybe he'll live a year. And so I was just praying and hoping, like, let him make it to this baby's first birthday. Like, let us have pictures of them together and memories of them together and all of this. And unfortunately, he died a month before she was born.
Oh.
Um, so we didn't get that opportunity.
Mhm.
And being a widow at 28 and being 8.5 months pregnant is a wild ride. Like
Oh,
I felt like a sideshow and a circus, like
yeah.
because people just didn't know what to do with me, right? Um, and so in the years after Keith's death, I just did a lot of processing and writing about what it's like to be a widow, and especially to be a young widow, and um, all the things that people do and say, and they're attempting to comfort you, but really it's just saying things to comfort themselves and make them feel less awkward around you.
Mm.
Uh, and so as I just continued to explore just grief and suffering and mental health, um, I discovered that I wanted to kind of be in it with people more. And I wanted to figure out how communities of faith can be more of a support system, and how like a truly comforting support system, and not just
Mhm.
a place that you hope will be that, but people are unequipped to actually um, do that. And then I learned about seminary programs in spiritual formation, which in general is how do people come to believe what they believe? Like, how does your understanding of faith develop? And so I went in thinking about learning more about spiritual formation in communities. And when I finished seminary, I was left with so many questions of why are we okay with faith, with our practices of faith? So going to church, studying your Bible, reading your Bible, um, serving, right? Giving your time, talents, and treasures, like all of these things that we talk about, which are good, but why are those the main or only things that we talk about as being the ways that you practice your faith. Because, along the way in seminary, there was one morning I woke up and um, I had a 5 minute long panic attack. And usually they last 20 to 30 seconds. It feels like hours, but it's a very short
Hmm.
amount of time. And this one, I stopped timing at like 4.5 minutes. So, because it was just going on and on, I couldn't cross the threshold to leave my home. And this happened several Sundays in a row. And so I just kept asking questions like, what are we doing for people who physically cannot come to church? Or if I'm in a depressive episode or the grief is so overwhelming, I can't focus on reading my Bible, right?
Hmm.
And so, what if I can't do the things that you've told me are the only ways to practice my faith? There's gotta be some, because I don't believe that God would say, oh no, you can only, you're only in if you can do these three things
Right.
rigorously, regularly. Um, and so I just started exploring what was the ancient church like? What were the ancient faith practices? What were all of these things? And it was um comforting to discover that they were nothing like we understand church, especially in North America, to be. Um, and also alarming that it was nothing like we understand
Hmm. Right.
to be. And so even after finishing seminary, I've just kind of been focused on learning more about contemplative practices and a little bit of mysticism and um, the things that for a very long time were standard spiritual practices. And we've kind of abandoned them now. So that's the short version.
Yeah. Well, wow.
Yeah.
What a story, and so sorry for all of your losses. I mean, that's a lot. And
Yeah.
and I just remember, and this doesn't even come close to comparing. I mean, and we don't compare, but the only as far as I can reach to to meet you in this is that when my first grandson was born, Blaine wasn't there. And it was so exciting to have a new grandson, but I was so sad at the same time. Like it was, and so much guilt because I should be excited, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Absolutely.
I was like devastated. and, and
Yeah.
I was thinking about how grief, seemed to just dampen everything that was joyful in my life. It just seemed to
Yep.
be putting a blanket on it all, kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's so easy to feel guilty about that.
Yeah.
Um, but it's real. Grief is
Mm.
real and it doesn't wait or hold off until it's convenient. And so we just kind of have to embrace that it does color everything. And it's sad that it does. And I get angry about that pretty
Mhm.
regularly, but
Yeah.
that's part of being human.
Yeah. And it seems like, what you've been studying and, all of the research that you've done has really helped you understand better um, how your faith or starting to develop some type of faith of your own has really helped you with your grief. So tell us more about, what's been helpful to you.
I realized, so I come from a Christian tradition, or I grew up in a Christian tradition that came out of the Puritan faith. So it was very rigorous, very um, intellectualized, very a lot of pressure and guilt to constantly be doing the right things. And learning to let go of that, especially to let go of what I felt like I should be doing, because that always leads to shame, um, opened myself up to start to look into myself and recognize, like, oh, I am really hurting and I am really struggling, and I need to find ways to be gentle and kind to myself. And if I am choosing to put my time and energy into things that are gentle and kind, that will go a long way in the healing, and that will help me move away from being motivated by guilt and shame. Um, so it's been a lot of little things. Like I made it my mission to walk all of the labyrinths that are geographically near me, and it's been funny because most of them I have discovered are not well maintained. And so some of them you couldn't see where the path was. And the whole point of a labyrinth is to be able to walk without making decisions. So you
Right.
just follow the path without having to choose where you're going. But if it's, covered by sticks and leaves, or the rocks that line the path are strewn all about, um, that becomes really frustrating. And I remember at one of them just throwing my arms up and saying, "Why is this so hard?" And all of a sudden there was this dawning of like, oh, that's how I feel about my faith too. Why is this so hard? I
Mm.
don't I don't think this should be so difficult. Um, and so there was that kind of recognizing that I was putting so much pressure on myself to grieve right and to grieve well and to, you know, have all my ducks lined up in a row and be able to say, here's the lesson I've learned from this part of grief. And instead of just being in the grief and letting the waves hit me and it being miserable and horrible, but the only way through it is through it. And you can't I used to intellectualize everything. So, oh, well, I'm feeling sad about this right now because I'm struggling with this. And so if I can just stop struggling with this, I won't feel sad anymore and I'll be fixed. Except that all that does is just kind of sweep it under the rug or push it down the road, or, whatever metaphor you want to use. Um, Another example, um, I started seeing a spiritual director who's like a spiritual companion who helps you notice the divine, whether you call that God or the Holy Spirit, or some people say the universe, right? Um, and she challenged me to go to a museum and practice Visio Divina, which is Latin for the divine seeing. So you're looking at art and just reflecting and asking questions about what you notice in the painting, what you notice in your emotions, what you notice in your body, right? All of these things. And and so I sat down, and there happened to be this exhibit at a museum near me about a historic art colony that I didn't even know had existed in the town next door.
Oh.
And they were responsible for developing like all of these artists, landscape artists that are like super famous and well known. And so all of these paintings are of landscapes that I know personally, like they're still there. And and so that was really fun to recognize familiar places. And so I sit down in front of this one painting of my favorite hill. I love to drive through these back roads, and they all used to be farms, and now they're mostly just hills and woods. And I'm looking, I'm like, oh, so beautiful, the greens, the blue sky, all of this. And there was this one red bush in the corner, and it really bothered me because it didn't seem to fit. It's like, why would the artist ruin this beautiful painting with this bright orange bush? And then remembering, oh, these are all plein air artists. They're painting what they see. They're not infusing anything except for their interpretation of what they're actually seeing. So am I telling God that God was wrong for putting that orange bush there because it ruined my understanding and idea of what beauty is?
Mm.
And on reflecting on that experience was like, oh, I have very concrete ideas of how things should be and how things should work out. And I am dictating to the divine what how things should be done. And maybe I need to back off because I was using that as a mode of control, that if A and B and C happens exactly how I decide it should happen, then everything will work out in the end. If I do this, that, and the other, no one else in my family will get sick. Or my single parenting of a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, or however old they were at that time, will be magically easier if I get remarried or if I win $1 million or if, right? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, maybe it's true to a certain extent. There would be more help and it would be a little easier, but it wouldn't erase the grief or it wouldn't, um, reality would still be there. And so that experience was a real awakening of how I was still trying to intellectualize my grief and I was still trying to explain things away and fix myself without actually being in the moment with the things that I didn't like. I mean, those are just the two stories that come to mind. But the
Mm-hmm.
more that I've explored these contemplative practices, the more I wouldn't say I'm comfortable with my grief. Crying still makes me feel like I'd rather throw up. But Uh, but the more I can accept that all those gross feelings that come with the grief are important, and that I need to experience them and not avoid them. And that's been really a huge turning point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it seems like you gained an understanding. And I think a lot of people at some point awaken to this and talk about it is that, the happiness that we seek, we're always seeking it outside, right? We're always looking, as soon as we get that good job, or as soon as we get the new car, as soon as we get, you know,
Yeah,
whatever we have, we'll be happy. Then we'll be happy. Or as
right.
soon as I retire, I'll be able to do all the fun things that I want to do.
Sure.
It's like you can have that all now.
Hey, you have so much more agency. I remember after grad school, so um my husband had cancer while we were engaged, and then we were both finishing grad school at the same time, and things had just been chaotic. And then he had appendicitis, and I had this was like H1N1 um, time. And so when he was in residency and we moved out west, um, it was this, now life can be boring. And we're just so excited. We've done the chaos. Like it has to get boring now, right?
Right.
And of course it didn't because ultimately we have no control over that. Um, but yeah, I always used to think, oh, well, when this happens, everything will calm down and then it'll feel more peaceful. Well, no, because I can't control that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm, reflecting on a lot of those feelings now as the whole world, especially being in the US, feels like it's like crumbling down around us. And we have some monicum of control in how we vote and things, but it's not a lot. We're
Yeah.
kind of at the mercy of people with the power. And so reminding myself, okay, you can create peace. You can create moments of boringness in your life. You can control your schedule. You can control your weekends. Um, you can decide that your kids can do one or no after school activities for the next 6 months, just so that you have more time together, more time that's unplanned and unstructured. And yeah, it's because these contemplative practices have become part of the rhythm of my life that I can adapt when I need to add more of them, or maybe I don't need as many of them right now, and be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. And we think that, you know, we have to, or we forget, I guess, that we have that control because we get into that routine every day and this is just what we do.
Yeah.
And, you know, at some point when grief hits, usually some kind of trauma, that's when we start waking up to the fact that we have more control than we think.
Sure.
Not to the outside circumstances, certainly, but to what happens with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our response. And one of the things I think people feel so often when they're grieving is, well, I should be able to, like, yeah, this person isn't here anymore, but I should still be able to go to work and perform like I always did. Like, I get that. I've said it too. But but also your life has been turned upside down, and you can't compare your right now to before the loss. Maybe one day you'll get back there. Maybe you won't. But instead of feeling that weight and that pressure of being one time in a therapy session, I was talking through this idea and just how I always internalize the idea of, you just do your best as you have to meet or exceed your best of all time at all times. So you have to keep raising the bar and keep beating your own personal record for whatever thing. And I was like, but I can't. My best isn't good enough right
Mm-hmm.
now. And I just can't do all of these things the way I want to do them. And my therapist at the time, he was just really wonderful. He just looked at me and said, "Oh, so you're just a schmuck like the rest of us? Like that's great because you can't be awesome at everything all the time." And
Mm-hmm.
that was just this huge wake up call that, oh, it's I have to do my best with what I have at the moment. And that isn't very much, but I can, maybe that is just making sure I take a shower and my kids eat 3 square meals with fruits and vegetables and I get 1 load of laundry done. And maybe that's my best for today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that really helped me to adjust my expectations for myself that if you were ill, you would not expect yourself to continue to achieve in the same ways as when you're healthy. And so when you're grieving, you cannot expect yourself to perform in the same ways that you would before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And isn't that so wonderful when you can begin to understand yourself and give yourself that compassion in those and the grace in that time, you know, because it is so hard. It's really painful.
Yeah.
So, um, how do people get a hold of you or how, like, you've got so much to share. Do you have resources or do you work with people at all? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, I'm on social media everywhere at Becky L. McCoy, and then my website is beckylmccoy.com. So that's super easy. On my website right now, I have a free ebook for it's called Five or Spiritual Practices for Weary Souls. So if you are just feeling that heaviness, that what you are trying to be and achieve is not working, or it is causing more stress, and you need some better tools. There's 5 in there that I walk through, and there's a playlist associated with it, and all sorts of resources in there. And you can join my email list through the website. That's kind of where there'll be information when my podcast comes back or when the book is ready for pre-order and all of those things. And like you read in my bio, I'm doing spiritual director training. So I'll be taking clients coming up pretty soon just to help people navigate and have a place to ask questions and explore. And I my goal is not to have answers for people, but to help them learn to be curious and gentle with themselves as they discover what works for them.
Oh, wow. Curious and gentle. You just said it all right there. Oh my goodness. And I can just tell your personality. You would be so awesome to work with. You're just so compassionate and understanding, and you can tell, you've had all this experience and all this wisdom to share. So I encourage people to look you up and to connect with you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I want to close by just giving you an opportunity to give any last advice or anything you want to share.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to recognize when you are putting pressure on yourself to grieve right or to grieve well or um, for your grieving life to look a specific way and step back and be curious and gentle with yourself and acknowledge that maybe your needs are different, and just explore what you might need and who can encourage you and help you to get there.
Wonderful. Thanks again for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was really lovely. Thank you.
And thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.